Matthew Thames spoke to the Night King about his intentions with Kevin. Matthew wanted to convince him to let Kevin join forces with him, but the Night King flatly rejected him, telling him that Kevin had far more important matters to deal with. It is often the case that not everyone is in a position to rule over all of their own choices in life. Only those who possessed great strength had the qualifications to preside over every aspect of their own life, let alone the lives of others. Most ordinary people spend their entire lives just trying to earn enough money to buy a new car, buy a new house, and do just enough to give their family the things they need. However, such people might never understand that in the eyes of the great figures who were at the peak of their status, their lives were just a joke. It was not just a saying that there was always someone better than you. As strong as Kevin had become, it was not an exaggeration to say that 90% of the people in the world would never be able to even imagine his power. However, how could he truly take control of his own life? A few years ago, he was chased out of his own family. Little did he know that the path he took was basically all planned out in advance by the Night King. He had never deviated from it at all. Matthew Thames knew this all very well, and that was why he was especially angry. Although he and the Night King were fellow disciples at the same school, their ideologies, personalities, and worldviews were completely different from each other.
"Do you really know what you are doing with Kevin? Does he know?"
Matthew Thames looked at the Night King and couldn't help raising his voice.
"He does not need to know. In my plan, he only needs to follow the steps I have planned out for him. No matter how much trouble he causes, I will cover it up for him," the Night King said. He was still looking out at the horizon. "Your bad temper hasn't changed even after so many years," the Night King added bitterly. "This isn't a bad temper, but the personality I chose. Do you need a reminder about what happened back then?" The more Matthew Thames spoke, the more excited he became. "That's enough. I didn't come to see you tonight just so we could get into a fight. We don't have much to talk about anyway. Different ideologies lead to different understandings of the world. Even if we argue until the end of time, we still won't be able to convince each other. So what's the point?" the Night King said, his tone suddenly becoming cold. It was as if Matthew's words had stirred his nerves. Even Kevin did not know that the Night King had taken on 3 disciples, including him. The oldest disciple was a rare genius. The Night King was so pleased that he had taught him everything he knew. Unfortunately, as time went on, the Night King began to worry that he had become too immersed in the joy of his own power. Time had proven this point. The Night King's oldest disciple eventually wholeheartedly wanted to help the Pinnacle rule over humanity once again. It could be said that this was the darkest period of time in the world of experts. In the end, the Night King had no choice but to personally take action. In order to restore the balance, he personally went to Apex Island to massacre the Pinnacle's experts before he drifted away. It could be said that his oldest disciple was the greatest source of pain in the Night King's life, because his beloved protege's path was all carefully planned out by him. However, he had neglected his influence from the very beginning. "Different ideologies are not a problem. I just really can't bear to see you repeat the same mistake," Matthew Thames said earnestly. "You don't need to worry about that. I will control myself. I will definitely not let the previous incident repeat itself." The Night King closed his eyes slowly and said in pain, "I don't deny that Kevin is a good person, but that is also why he needs to plan his own life. The reason why I asked him to help is to help increase his understanding of the world. I want him to have a good heart and take on the safety of the whole world as his personal responsibility in the future. This is the bare minimum qualification for him if he is to someday inherit your position." Matthew Thames tried his best to persuade him. The Night King did not answer immediately. He was silent for 2 full minutes with his eyes closed, as if he was seriously thinking about what Matthew Thames had said. After a long time, the Night King slowly opened his eyes again. He turned around and looked at Matthew Thames deeply. "I can promise to ask Kevin to help you. But I will also give up the favor I owe you from back then," the Night King said with a deeper meaning.
Matthew Thames was stunned for a moment, then quickly reacted. He looked like he did not know whether to laugh or cry. He pointed at the Night King with his finger and said,
"You are trying to skirt karma. You did not hesitate to use your own disciple to exchange for it. You're the one who said that you want him to make the world his responsibility," the Night King said in a serious manner.
Matthew Thames curled his lips speechlessly when he heard this. Meanwhile, on the island in the center of Swan Lake, Dustin Newman looked around and revealed a proud smile. From the first wave of people who set foot on the island, he had handled them all with ease. This was the third wave of people he had taken care of.
"With so little strength, you still dare to challenge us?"
Dustin Newman said disdainfully. Barry Damon slowly walked out of the forest and tossed the bodies of 5 or 6 unconscious people on the ground in front of him.
"Mr. Williams was right. Tonight was never going to be a peaceful night,"
Barry said with a straight face.
"What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be guarding the north side of the island?" Dustin asked curiously. "Amanda is handling the north side. Violet is looking after the east and south by herself. Given the geography of the island, I was afraid something would happen to you, so I came to make sure everything was okay."
Barry Damon walked over to a tree and leaned against it with his arms crossed in front of his chest.
"What are you afraid of? What makes you think that I wouldn't be able to handle such an easy task?"
Dustin said, clearly a little angry.
"If that's not the case, then why did these few people get past you?"
Barry glanced at him and said in a flat tone,
"Fortunately, I rushed over and took care of these guys on my way here. Why don't you just head back to the house and wait for Mr. Williams to punish you?"
Just as the two of them were talking, Kevin appeared with Violet Sweeney and Amanda Perry.
"Mr. Williams!"
The two of them greeted him at the same time. Kevin nodded slightly and looked at the people lying on the ground. He asked, "How is the situation?"
"It's all under control, Mr. Williams. None of them were able to get past us,"
Dustin Newman answered first. Barry Damon glanced at him and did not say anything more. "It's good that no one got by." Kevin took a deep breath and said, "You two head back first." The two of them looked at each other in surprise. Then they came to Amanda Perry's side. Kevin stretched out his hands and circulated his spirit energy to draw a dozen complicated and gorgeous patterns in the air. When he finished drawing, the marks slowly disappeared into the air. Dustin and Barry frowned because they could clearly feel that the space around them had changed somehow, but they weren't sure how. They didn't have a deep understanding of spatial zones, so they could only feel that some slight changes had taken place. Soon they saw a large amount of dense white fog coming out of the forest. In less than a minute, it had completely filled up everywhere they could see across the entire island. Out of curiosity, Dustin Newman focused his spiritual energy on his eyes and looked toward the outside of the dense fog.
"How could this be?"
he muttered in surprise. No matter how hard he focused his own spiritual energy, he couldn't see anything beyond the whiteness. He couldn't even hear anything. "How is it? After that, we'll be living here on this island for a while. This can protect our privacy very well." Kevin smiled proudly. He snapped his fingers and took out 2 red stones from his pocket. "Take this. You can enter and exit the island freely. With these, you won't get lost in the thick fog," he said. Sure enough, the moment the stones were in their hands, the white fog disappeared from Dustin and Barry's sight.
"This is incredible,"
Dustin Newman muttered. "Don't be alarmed. It's just a formation. This formation will also silently absorb all of the surrounding spiritual energy. In the future, everyone's power base will be more relaxed here," Kevin said as he held up his hand to keep Dustin from becoming alarmed. After that, they all went back to the house to get some rest. However, while they were all very happy with these recent developments, others were worried. In a house in Washington, after listening to the reports from his subordinates, Mason Zimmerman's face became dark. With a bang, Mason Zimmerman smashed the coffee table in front of him to pieces.
"A bunch of useless trash. Every last one of them. I didn't even get any information from when I asked them to go and find out. Now they've actually got themselves captured."
Mason Zimmerman roared furiously. The person who came to report on the situation in front of him didn't dare to refute him. He could only lower his head even more. "It will all be okay," he said timidly.
"How can you say that it will all be okay? I just wanted to gather some information. If I can't even get a team of people to do such a small thing, how am I ever going to make any real progress?"
Mason said in a somewhat flustered and exasperated manner. "This is all my fault. I would be happy to personally go out and gather some intel on Kevin." The man braced himself and said. Only then did Mason Zimmerman's facial expression become a little better.
"Oh, right. That reminds me. I don't just want to monitor Kevin. I want you to also send a few people to keep an eye on Olivia Rafferty."
Mason Zimmerman clenched his fist and ordered. "Yes, sir." The man braced himself and agreed. He knew very well how difficult and dangerous it was to monitor a level 7 expert. However, he could not refute Mason Zimmerman at this moment, so he could only clench his teeth and prepare to take on the challenge personally. Half the night passed very quickly. Because he had urgent company matters to attend to, Tyler Dawn told Kevin that he would be immediately leaving the house at Swan Lake. Kevin, who had finished up his training, saw that it was almost 9 o'clock. He thought that Lily should be getting up soon, so he took out his phone and hesitated a few times before calling her. After a few rings, the call was answered. "Hello, Kevin?" Lily asked, sounding a little haggard. These past few days had been difficult for her. After being told off by Sandra Wilson the last time, Lily resolutely went to the Williams Company anyway. Almost every night she was the last to leave the company. She had been doing everything in her power to stabilize the overall situation, along with Emo Squire and the others, to resist Dalton Steele's business conglomerate. In these past few days, Lily had witnessed several assassinations and assassination attempts on powerful people, involving everything from car accidents to trespassing. Fortunately, all of these were only ordinary people. With the bodyguards that had been arranged by Emo Squire, she was safely able to avoid any serious danger, at least so far. "It's me. How have you been, my love?" Kevin bit his lip and asked with some difficulty. "I'm all right. You must have been having a hard time in D.C., Lily asked with a tired tone. "Fortunately, I've made some recent breakthroughs," Kevin answered. As soon as he finished speaking, neither of them took the initiative to say anything else. The atmosphere suddenly became heavy. There was never any doubt in Kevin's mind that he loved Lily more than anything else in the world. After all, everything he was doing in Washington now was for her. In the end, Lily was the first to speak. "You make sure to take care of yourself in Washington. If it is really too dangerous, come back to Chicago. Promise me, okay?" "I know the situation in Chicago," Kevin sighed slightly and said. "Dalton apparently has some misunderstanding about me. Let him cause trouble in Chicago. I will arrange for someone to bring you to D.C. so we can be together. That way I'll know that you're safe." "What did you say?" Lily was stunned. "Don't you want me to look after the Williams Company? You built so much here in Chicago. Are you afraid of Dalton?" "Listen to me. The situation between Dalton and me is a little complicated. I didn't say that I don't want to continue taking care of things in Chicago. I just want you to let Sandra handle the company for now. I can protect you better if you're here in D.C. with me," Kevin said as he licked his lips, unsure of exactly how to express what he wanted to say. Was he really afraid of Dalton Steele? The answer was, of course, no. "No, I can't leave. Could it be that in your heart I am inferior to Sandra? I am confident that I can handle things at the Williams Company better than anyone else," Lily said. Tears were already welling up in her eyes, and she could feel that she was about to start crying at any moment. She never thought that Kevin would think that she was not up to the job of overseeing Williams Media. As Kevin was speaking on the phone with Lily, he tried to encourage her to come to Washington where he could better take care of her. After Lily questioned whether Kevin was afraid of Dalton Steele, Kevin assured her that he wasn't. but that things between the two friends had become complicated. Lily also resisted Kevin's request for her to come to D.C. because she insisted that she was better positioned to look after the Williams Company than Sandra Wilson, of whom she clearly felt threatened. But in Kevin's mind, he knew that the Chicago of today was a very different place from the city he had left not too long ago. Not only was Dalton Steele a threat, but the Myriads were also hiding in the Midwest. Due to the relationship between them, Brett Stewart would definitely bring his men to Chicago. In addition, there were also Xavier Marshall and others from the Alliance. With him present and in charge of the Williams Company, whether it was the Healing Arts School, the Myriads, or even the Alliance, they would all have to consider the consequences of acting too rashly. But now, the biggest problem was that he was almost at his wit's end in Washington, D.C. He might even need to transfer some men from the Radiants. He had no time to even ask about Chicago unless the Williams Company was truly on the verge of being destroyed. He would have no choice but to rush back. Lily, please listen to me. The situation isn't anything like what you stepped into at first. It's not that I don't trust you to handle things. I'm just worried about you. I can't bear to see you in danger. If you really believe in me, then let me stay in Chicago. Lily used her hands to cover her mouth, not letting her crying sound so obvious. After saying that, Lily hung up the phone. Hearing the beeping sound, Kevin's heart was filled with worry. After not seeing each other for a while, Lily had become more and more stubborn. However, Kevin had never thought that his desire to keep her safe would actually hurt Lily's self-esteem to such a great extent. After the call ended, Kevin texted his parents, wanting them to come with Richard Swinton to Washington. Regarding Alan and Susan Williams, Kevin had always felt that he owed the two of them a lot. His father had been implicated by him and almost lost his life to the rest of the Williams family. Very quickly, Alan replied. Because of the rest of the Swinton family, it was impossible for Richard Swinton to leave St. Louis, so he could not come to Washington, D.C. But Alan and Susan could come at any time. Kevin immediately arranged for some people from the Radiance's branch in St. Louis to send someone to escort the two of them to Washington, D.C. as soon as possible. Just as Kevin was planning out how to make suitable longevity-extending medicinal pills for the two of them, he suddenly received a call from Jordan Black. "What's wrong?" Kevin asked doubtfully. Jordan and Justin Black would not take the initiative to come to him for just any small matter. If there was anything wrong, the two brothers would think of a way to solve it if at all possible. "Mr. Williams, can you come to the school? Something happened," Jordan Black said in a hurry. "I'm on my way," Kevin said decisively. An hour later, when Kevin and Troy Evans arrived at the school, they saw two groups of people standing in the hall ready to fight. "What's going on here? Who are you?" Kevin said as he walked straight up to Jordan and Justin Black. "Mr. Williams, they say that they want the building," Justin Black replied. "They want the building? What are you talking about? What exactly is going on?" Kevin frowned and asked. Before Justin could answer, a man walked up to Kevin and slapped him on the back of his head. He raised his head and asked, "You are their leader? You opened this school?" "Yes." Kevin was shocked by the slap. "Who do you think you are? What do you want?" "Let me introduce myself." The man smiled and snapped his fingers. Immediately, someone rushed over, bringing him a chair and a table. The man sat down in the chair and raised his hand. Another person quickly brought a cigar over and lit it for him. Seeing him treated so extravagantly, Kevin was surprised no one had brought him a glass of wine. Almost before he could finish his thought, another person immediately approached and opened a bottle of wine for the man. The person took out a large wine glass and poured a third of the bottle for the man. The man took a puff of smoke and blew it out at Kevin. He crossed his legs and said casually, "Let me introduce myself. My name is Doug Harrison. This shouldn't take too long. The main reason for coming here today is that I want the land on which the school of yours sits. You'll need to move immediately." Kevin finally understood that this guy was here to buy his building. "I'm sorry, but I haven't decided to sell it." Please leave immediately and don't disturb the operations of my school any more than you already have, Kevin said politely.
What are you talking about? I don't intend to buy this place. I just want you to move out immediately. Do you not understand? This is not a transaction, this is an order.
Doug Harrison flicked the ashes of his cigar and didn't even look at Kevin.
I think you are deliberately stirring up trouble, Jordan Black said, unable to hold back his temper any longer.
Luckily, Troy Evans stopped him.
Don't be impulsive. Let Mr. Williams handle it, he said to him softly.
Kevin looked at Jordan Black, then turned his head and looked at Doug Harrison again. May I ask why you want us to move? Although Kevin knew that this man did not come with good intentions, he did not plan to give him a hard time unless it was absolutely necessary. After all, it was always best to first show courtesy and then attack.
It's very simple. This piece of land originally belonged to us.
Doug Harrison waved his hands and said arrogantly,
Back then, the Kessler family rented this piece of land under our name for their businesses. Now that the Kessler family is gone, we naturally have come to take it back,
Doug Harrison said impatiently. Upon hearing this, Kevin furrowed his brows. He really had no idea about this matter. I'm sorry. When the Kessler family disappeared, all of the properties under their name were transferred to me. Kevin didn't give in and said, If you still don't want to leave and continue to cause trouble, don't blame us for being impolite.
Huh. Impolite?
Doug Harrison held the smoke from the cigar in his mouth for a moment before exhaling slowly and saying disdainfully,
I know you are an expert, but the Harrison family runs ordinary businesses, and we've never interfered with the world of the experts, and we're in no mood now to care about your stupid school. You have to be reasonable. It's only right that you pay back what you owe. When the Kessler family built this place, they borrowed money from us. So to be precise, this place belongs to the Harrison family and it always has. Am I making myself clear?
It was clear that Kevin wouldn't be able to win if they went to court. Kevin sighed and said, Sorry, I didn't know anything about what you've just said, but we really can't give in. I would be happy to pay for this piece of property. You can name any price you want. In fact, Kevin could only admit that he was in the wrong even if he was not aware of the situation, so he was happy to oblige by paying more than the fair market price for the property.
Buy the property? Do you know how much it costs? Why don't you go out and inquire about the price of real estate here in Washington? Do you think you can afford to buy it just because you want to? Does someone like you have that much money?
Doug Harrison mocked him with disdain. Jordan and Justin Black couldn't bear it anymore. If it wasn't for Troy Evans, the two of them would have rushed forward and pressed Doug Harrison to the ground a long time ago.
Did I not treat you with respect when you barged in here? Even Mr. Williams is being more than respectful toward you. Yet you still dare to be so aggressive?
Jordan Black roared in anger. Justin Black was also extremely agitated. He stepped forward and said, What the hell are you saying? Do you believe that I won't make you regret ever showing up here? Do you even know who you're looking down on right now? All of you, quiet down. Kevin's voice gradually became cold. You mean to tell me you're not willing to sell this property to me?
What do you think?
Doug Harrison retorted, unwilling to treat Kevin with any respect at all. Seeing him be so stubborn, Kevin gradually lost his patience. In fact, a piece of land did not matter to him at all in the end. He could easily just ask Tyler Dawn to find another property. However, he refused to give in like this. His Williams family school was already established here. If he were to move it now with his tail between his legs, wouldn't that make the most powerful people across Washington laugh at him? Just as the two sides were in a deadlock, rapid footsteps came from outside. Then 5 or 6 uniformed men quickly walked in. The men in the lead were all about 40 years old.
Mr. Harrison, we received a call on your behalf saying that someone has forcefully taken over the property of your family, the man asked with a serious expression. It's these people.
Doug Harrison nodded at Kevin and the others.
These people keep trying to persuade me to sell my property to them and even plan to use force against me. Since you guys are here now, please do with them as you see fit.
The men turned to look at Kevin and got straight to the point. "Sir, after our verification, it has been determined that this is indeed the Harrison family's property. Please pack up your things and leave immediately." Kevin frowned even more. Even he couldn't use his power base to intimidate these people. Otherwise, he would attract a lot of trouble. "Wait a minute. Please allow me to make a call first." Kevin immediately dialed Scott Whitney's number and told him about the situation at the school. "I understand the situation, but what does it have to do with us? Besides, the school has no affiliation with the Reaper Squad," Scott responded. "Old man, don't burn the bridge after crossing the river. I've already helped you. Can't I ask you to help me with something now?" Kevin said angrily. "All right. I'll send some of our people over to take a look. Don't forget that you owe me a favor." Scott hung up the phone after saying that proudly. "Damn that old fox." Kevin's chest heaved up and down. Very quickly, the people from the Reaper Squad rushed over, led by Stanley Cooper, who immediately took the lead and got down to business.
"What's going on here? Why did you ask us to bring so many people here?"
Stanley said as he greeted Kevin. "Who is this guy?" a police officer said. Stanley Cooper raised his eyebrows and said,
"I originally wanted to settle this peacefully. Since you don't know how to appreciate favors, then you can't blame me."
Then Stanley took out a small book from his pocket and threw it in the officer's face. He said,
"Read it clearly for me and then we can talk."
This scene shocked the people assembled there. The police officer had been called by Doug Harrison. Who was this man who was so unwilling to treat him with any respect? The officer's expression immediately became gloomy, but when he saw the record in the book, he froze on the spot. He took a deep breath and tried to stand up straight. He respectfully handed the book back to Stanley with both hands. This action shocked everyone except Kevin. They all started to guess who Stanley Cooper was. Only Kevin felt that everything was natural. The position of the Reaper Squad in the government was unique. Of course, even Kevin knew that the reason why the police officer was so respectful was not only because of the extraordinary status of the Reaper Squad, but also because this organization had the right to investigate everything thoroughly and seize assets. Now, let alone the officer, how many people assembled here today could be investigated thoroughly?
"This matter will be taken over by us now. You can all leave now,"
Stanley said as he put away the book and did not even bother to look at the officer. Hearing this, the police officer's face was full of unwillingness, but he did not make a sound. He could only take his people away dejectedly. Suddenly, Doug Harrison called out,
"Hey, wait a minute. Why are you suddenly leaving? This matter has not been settled yet."
"I have some other urgent matters to attend to. If you have any other questions, you can ask this gentleman." The officer gave Doug Harrison a look, hoping he would be able to take care of himself. He then quickly left the Williams family school with his subordinates.
"Hey, who is this guy?"
Doug Harrison looked at Stanley and asked,
"What do you plan to do with this property? I have to remind you that this is my family's property. You can't play favorites and cheat others." "You don't have to remind me about this."
Stanley Cooper turned around and looked at Kevin with a smile.
"According to our understanding, your family owes a huge sum of money to the KWTD Corporation."
Kevin didn't understand what Stanley meant. He immediately walked over to the side and dialed Tyler Dawn's number.
"What does our family's debt have to do with you?"
Doug Harrison's heart suddenly tightened and a bad feeling rose in his heart.
"It has nothing to do with me, but it has something to do with him. Just wait and see,"
Stanley replied concisely. Doug Harrison had a sense he'd lost his battle. To a man whom he thought was nothing more than an arrogant ant. Doug Harrison had a sense he'd lost his battle. To a man whom he thought was nothing more than an arrogant ant. Doug Harrison's attempt to reclaim the property on which Kevin's school was being built failed when Kevin called in a favor from his Reaper Squad bosses, who pointed out to Harrison that their vast government connections had revealed Harrison owed money to the KWTD, which was Kevin's own corporation. People generally don't fight with government officials. Even a rich young man like Doug Harrison understood this. Doug Harrison did not expect that the methods he had used in the past would be completely useless after meeting Kevin. Furthermore, the reinforcements that he had brought over with him were obviously thwarted by someone from a higher position in the government.
"There's something happening that I need to go take care of. I think I should,"
Doug Harrison started to say, clearly trying to retreat.
"Don't be in such a hurry to leave. This matter hasn't been settled yet. You won't be able to leave until I tell you that you can,"
Stanley Cooper said without even raising his head.
"But I have to leave. Could it be that you can really force me to stay here?"
Doug Harrison's heart skipped a beat. He was not stupid. He could totally imagine what would happen if he continued to stay here and insisted on having the property returned to him. It would definitely not end well for him. It would be better for him to leave now and find an opportunity to come back with more people. In the future, he would find an opportunity to come back. He didn't believe that the Reaper Squad would be able to rush over in time to protect Kevin every time.
"You can try,"
Stanley raised his eyebrows and said. Immediately, a powerful pressure was emitted from his body and instantly covered the entire hallway. In Troy Evans' eyes, the pressure was easy for them to handle. However, to Doug Harrison and the rest of the ordinary people who were present, this pressure was like Mount Everest pressing down on them, causing them to almost be unable to breathe.
You...
Doug Harrison felt short of breath and his chest was tight. He could barely breathe, not to mention the fact that speaking clearly was a struggle.
"You what? I said that no one is allowed to leave without my permission. If you want to try, I will have to teach you a lesson."
Stanley's face had become serious. No matter how unwilling Doug Harrison was, he could only endure it silently. He was just an ordinary person, so how could he compete with an expert? Time passed and soon a figure walked into the school, pushed through the crowd and arrived in the middle of the scene.
"Mr. Williams,"
Tyler Dawn respectfully called out.
"What's going on here?"
"Do you know this man?" Kevin pointed at Doug Harrison and asked softly. Tyler shook his head. However, when he saw Tyler Dawn, a huge wave of emotions rose in Doug Harrison's heart. He was a little dumbfounded. He kept thinking in his mind, who the hell was this Kevin guy? He had been able to summon Tyler Dawn with just a phone call? "His name is Doug Harrison. He came to take the land on which this school sits," Kevin said concisely. He hadn't explained the full situation earlier on the phone. He only said that something had happened at the school and asked Tyler to come over. Tyler frowned when he heard that. He looked at Doug Harrison and thought for a while. Then he asked tentatively,
"Is Damon Harrison your father?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Dawn. You don't know me, but I know you. I went to your office with my father to talk about the contract before,"
Doug Harrison said with a nod. He spoke very quickly. Although Doug Harrison was a bit of a playboy, at least he had some sense of reason. In most cases, he knew who he could mess with and who he had to run away from. Now, Tyler Dawn was standing right in front of him. Not to mention someone like him, but even if his father was here personally, even he could only grovel at the feet of someone like Tyler Dawn.
"All right. Talking to you is a waste of my time."
Tyler took out his phone and got someone to get him Damon Harrison's contact details, then he dialed his private number.
"Hello? Who is this? How did you get this number?"
It was a low voice that came from the other end of the phone.
"Ah, Mr. Harrison, you have such a big presence,"
Tyler said before getting straight to the point, saying,
"This is Tyler Dawn. I'd like you to come to the Williams family school in half an hour. Otherwise, your precious son will suffer greatly."
After saying this, Tyler hung up the phone. He didn't even look at Doug Harrison. He turned around and walked over to Kevin once again.
"I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. I really didn't know about anything to do with the Harrisons in this piece of property,"
Tyler Dawn said apologetically. "I don't blame you, but I have a request. I am happy to settle this matter today, but I don't want anything similar to happen in the future," Kevin replied seriously. In fact, he really didn't have any intention of blaming Tyler Dawn. I guarantee that nothing like this will happen again," Tyler replied loudly. After waiting for a while, Kevin leisurely asked some people to bring over some tables and chairs and sat with Tyler Dawn to have some coffee. However, Doug Harrison could only stand off to the side and wait obediently. He didn't even dare to breathe too loudly. As for those who had followed Doug Harrison, under Stanley Cooper's pressure, they all squatted down on the ground. Very soon, Damon Harrison rushed over. From the moment he got out of the car, he could feel the pressure in the building and he knew that he was walking into a dangerous situation. As soon as he came through the door, he saw Doug Harrison calling out to him in a weak voice, "Dad!" When Damon's gaze passed his son and landed on Tyler Dawn, he was so frightened that he almost fell to his knees. At the same time, his anger flamed in his heart. He came in front of Doug Harrison and slapped him to the ground, then followed it up with a series of punches and kicks. Damon did not hold back. In just a few moments, Doug Harrison, who was screaming, was beaten black and blue. Blood flowed out from his nose and mouth. While hitting his son, he shouted, "I told you not to show off. You only know how to cause trouble for me. Do you really think Tyler Dawn is someone you can mess with? What the hell is the matter with you?" At first, Doug Harrison was still struggling and screaming, but as his father continued to hit him harder and harder, his cries became softer until he lay on the ground in defeat. "All right, that's enough." Kevin slowly put down the coffee cup in his hand, looking straight ahead and reminding him in a soft voice, "If you don't let up, your son will be beaten to death by you. If he dies somewhere else, that's of no importance to me. But don't let him die here and cause trouble for me." Damon Harrison looked down at his son and snorted coldly. He looked reluctant, but he was secretly relieved in his heart. He really wanted to make it clear that he did not dare to offend Tyler Dawn. "Stop pretending." Kevin smiled and shook his head. Damon looked over at him awkwardly. Even though he didn't know who Kevin was, he knew very well that since this ordinary-looking young man could sit at the same table and drink coffee with someone like Tyler Dawn, his status must not be underestimated. "Mr. Dawn, I'm so sorry about this," Damon Harrison said cautiously. "Mr. Harrison, if I remember correctly, your family still owes a lot of money to the KWTD Corporation. Isn't that right?" Tyler Dawn took a whiff of the coffee in his cup, then glanced at him and asked in a cold voice before taking another sip. Yes, sir," Damon stammered as he wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. The Harrison family was not that well known in Washington, D.C. In recent years, they had just started to get into real estate. After borrowing some money from the KWTD Corporation, they built this place to improve their relationship with the Kessler family. During this time, Damon Harrison had built a strong relationship and had obtained a lot of benefits from the Kessler family. However, he knew very well that if he wanted to fight Tyler Dawn head-on, it would be no different from sending himself to his own death. "Mr. Harrison, I haven't asked you to begin repaying your debt because I feel that we're all business people. But today your son brought his men here and said that he wanted us to leave immediately. That's why I asked you to come here. I wanted to ask you if your family is still so arrogant right now." Tyler Dawn slightly pressed the coffee cup in his hand against the table. With a slight sound, Damon Harrison visibly flinched as he was so scared that he immediately buried his head deeply against his chest. "Sir, I believe you misunderstood. It's all my fault for indulging my son too much. That's why he has looked down on others and offended you today. In order to appease your anger, how about I give this piece of land to you for free?" Damon was extremely anxious, and he desperately wanted to get Tyler Dawn's forgiveness. He knew very well that Tyler Dawn was one of the most powerful people in the business world in the entire country, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that his words could directly decide the fate of the entire Harrison family. "What's the use of giving it to me? The person you should be apologizing to isn't me. It's Mr. Williams." Tyler Dawn reprimanded him coldly. Looking at Kevin, who was casually sitting in his chair across from Tyler, Damon Harrison was so shocked that his eyeballs almost popped out. Even Tyler Dawn was treating this young man with the utmost respect. Who could this person be that he would command such a response from Tyler Dawn? Damon Harrison was guessing all kinds of possibilities in his heart. But since Tyler Dawn had already said so, how could he not do as he was told?
Mr. Williams, my son has offended you today. Please don't take it to heart. After all, he is still young and doesn't know any better,
Damon Harrison said with a lowered head. He is young, but I'm not that old either. Since you guys have cooperated with the Kessler family, you should know very well how they fell, right? Kevin rotated the coffee cup on the table slowly between his fingers and asked in a soft voice. Damon Harrison suddenly thought of a possibility. He raised his head in shock and looked at Kevin with a face full of disbelief. Your guess is right. I was the one who destroyed the Kessler family. Kevin slowly turned his head and stared into Damon Harrison's eyes, trying his best to see something.
Mr. Williams, I'm so sorry. If I had known,
Damon stammered, trying to explain himself in desperation. The reason why the Kessler family had been destroyed had already been made public in Washington, D.C. Faced with a man who could destroy the Kessler family with such ease, Damon Harrison couldn't imagine how many days his own family would have to live if Kevin really wanted to make them suffer the same fate. For a moment, Damon was so scared that his tongue was tied, and he couldn't even speak clearly. Faced with an embarrassed Damon Harrison who was sweating profusely, Kevin frowned slightly and looked at him quietly. Suddenly, Kevin shook his head and said, All right, that's enough of this. It's just a small conflict between your son and me. I won't take it to heart.
Thank you, Mr. Williams.
Damon Harrison thanked him as if he had been granted amnesty. He exhaled loudly. However, you have to discipline your son better from now on. If there is a next time, don't blame me for eliminating your entire family from this city. Kevin didn't forget to give a cold warning.
Yes. Don't worry, Mr. Williams. I can assure you that he will learn his lesson. There will definitely not be a next time.
Damon didn't even dare to raise his head as he apologized. Tyler Dawn, who was watching Kevin, had some doubts. At that moment, Kevin stood up and came in front of Doug Harrison. He looked down at him as he writhed on the floor in pain and said, Tell me who asked you to come here. He didn't believe that what he did today was something that could be done by him alone. Therefore, Kevin believed that there must be someone pulling the strings behind Doug Harrison. At that moment, Doug Harrison could only weakly open his eyes. His face was covered in blood.
Didn't you hear what Mr. Williams said? Why don't you tell him the truth?
Damon Harrison said and raised his palm at his son again. It looked like he was going to attack again at any moment.
It's the patriarch of the Robbins family, Archie Robbins,
Doug Harrison replied timidly in a low voice. After knowing the answer, Kevin narrowed his eyes. Take him away, Kevin ordered before he turned around and sat back down in his chair. Damon Harrison thanked Kevin and Tyler one after another and arranged for people to carry Doug Harrison away.
Mr. Williams, do you think something is a bit off about Damon Harrison?
Tyler Dawn couldn't help but ask. He seems normal enough. At first, I thought that his cooperation with the Kessler family might be related to the secluded valley, but judging from his performance just now, I think I was worrying too much. I really don't think he's a threat, Kevin said with some disappointment. The secluded valley had always been a thorn in Kevin's side. This organization had tried to assassinate him so many times. However, the whereabouts of the secluded valley were too mysterious, making it impossible for him to truly fight back. But Kevin knew that though they were currently quiet, that didn't mean that they were about to attack again. With Tyler Dawn arriving at Kevin's school and then calling Damon Harrison to the scene, the situation ended. Damon beat his son, Doug, badly. To make it clear that the Harrisons would honor their debts to Tyler and his superiority as well as that of Kevin Williams. Kevin learned from Doug that it was Archie Robbins who sent him to the school to demand the property back. Kevin had heard from Earl Mathis that the headquarters of the secluded valley was located in the Upper Realm. That was one of the main reasons why Kevin wanted to get there, so that he could destroy the secluded valley.
"How do you plan to resolve the matter of the Robbins family?"
Tyler Dawn asked him. Kevin didn't answer immediately, but he didn't intend to give up. After thinking for a few minutes, Kevin decided to return the favor. "Does Archie Robbins have a son or daughter?" Kevin asked as a smile appeared on his face. For some reason, when Tyler Dawn saw this smile, he suddenly felt worried for the entire Robbins family. Stanley Cooper took a step forward and answered,
"As far as I know, Archie Robbins has a son, Quincy. However, that kid's talent is average at best. Still, Archie Robbins really loves him, and he has indulged him too much for his own good. This has caused Quincy to spend all his time drinking, and he even got involved in gambling. Every day he would go to a casino to gamble away his father's money."
What a good son," Kevin sneered and commented, and then he looked at Tyler Dawn. "Are you free later?" he asked.
"I don't have anything important to do. I can leave it to my people at the company,"
Tyler replied. He immediately understood what Kevin meant.
"I have to go now. I will send you Quincy Robbins' photo later,"
Stanley said as he waved in the direction of his subordinates and quickly left the school. The reason Kevin asked what Tyler was doing later was because he wanted to take advantage of Tyler's identity to set a trap. When it was almost 8 o'clock, Kevin picked up Tyler Dawn and they headed to the casino. At first, the two of them were just playing a few hands of blackjack. Tyler was not good at gambling, and to make matters worse, his luck was bad tonight. In less than 10 minutes, he lost a significant amount of money at one of the high-stakes tables, although it was just pocket change to him. But Kevin was different. He had long had a knack for numbers and for analyzing the movements and behaviors of others. Gambling for him was like walking for most people, second nature. The moment he sat down, Kevin was like a crazy money-sucking machine, winning hand after hand at one high-stakes table after another. In the end, Tyler Dawn had no choice but to just stand back and watch Kevin. In just half an hour, he had made millions. He was like a god of gambling. The dealers and pit bosses in the casino had long noticed the two of them, but they could not discover any sign of foul play, so they could only bear with it. It was impossible for them to chase away their customers just because they won too much, right? Soon, a higher-up from the casino came up behind Kevin and Tyler and said politely, "Gentlemen, your performance has been so good that we would like to upgrade you. I would like to invite you to go to a private room on the second floor now." "Oh, so fast? We haven't even been here for that long," Kevin replied as he played with the chips in his hand. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can assure you that the customers on the second floor play at stakes that would be more suitable for someone like you. You can win quite a bit more up there," the staff member explained delicately. Kevin looked at the man with a profound look, then patted Tyler Dawn's shoulder with a smile. "Sounds like we've been upgraded. Since they say so, what right do we have to object?" "Lead the way," Tyler said as he pushed the glasses up on the bridge of his nose. Seeing the two of them cooperate, the smile on the staff member's face became even wider. Although it was an honor to go to the private room on the second floor, there were other meanings behind the invitation. Not only was the minimum bet on the second floor much higher than on the first floor, but they also had more professional dealers. Moreover, the guests upstairs were all very rich or very talented. In the private room on the second floor, Quincy Robbins' face was full of smiles. His eyes were narrowed into slits. The table in front of him was filled with chips. His luck tonight was excellent. He had almost taken out all of the other players at the poker table, and he had already won a considerable amount of money. "Ha ha! I won again!" Quincy shouted as he threw his cards down on the table. Another huge pile of chips was swept in front of Quincy. At this time, the door of the room was pushed open from the outside. Under the lead of the staff, Kevin and Tyler walked into the room and sat down. "Oh, someone new came to hand over their money to me? I'm so happy. The more people, the better," Quincy said as he looked at Kevin and Tyler as if he was looking at two rich kids who he would be able to squeeze every penny from. "You talk a big game. Do you really think no one can beat you? Kevin said with a slight frown. Come and play a few hands against me and then tell me if you're still not convinced. Quincy Robbins said with disdain. Luck is on my side tonight. And besides, I'm afraid you guys don't have enough money to hang with me. You're awfully cocky, Tyler Dawn said as he angrily slapped the table and said, Bring it on, kid. Seeing the intense sparks between the two of them, the smiles on the staff's faces became even wider. The dealer handed some chips to the two of them and slowly left the table. Let's play cards. I want to squeeze them dry tonight. Quincy Robbins slammed the table several times in a row and said impatiently. Kevin simply sat back and took a sip of his drink. The dealer looked at Kevin and Tyler with pity in his eyes, mainly because he had witnessed Quincy Robbins tonight. He had really been lucky and had amassed a huge amount of chips. It would be hard for anyone to take him down. As expected, Tyler's skill level could not be compared with Quincy Robbins's. In less than 10 minutes, the small amount of money he had won on the first floor, as well as quite a bit more than he had bought in for on the second floor, had all been lost. At this time, the chips in front of Quincy Robbins had piled up into a sizable mountain. Ha ha! You still don't believe me when I say you don't stand a chance against me. How many minutes has it been? You already have nothing left. Quincy Robbins pointed at Tyler and laughed mockingly. Tyler's expression was ugly, but he could not argue with him. In fact, he had always been a person whose actions spoke louder than words. Kevin took another sip of his drink, patted Tyler's shoulder, and said, I think that's enough. We should stop here tonight. Tyler sighed and got up to leave with Kevin. Seeing that the two of them were about to leave, Quincy Robbins suddenly became anxious. Hold on a minute. He lost all his money, but you haven't. Do you have the courage to sit down and continue playing with me? Kevin stopped moving, and a smile flashed across his face, unbeknownst to Quincy, who was looking at his back. He turned his head and said expressionlessly, Why should I play with you? Quincy Robbins opened his mouth but could not say anything. Indeed, all the chips were in his hands. Why should Kevin play with him when the odds were so stacked against him? However, Quincy had been so lucky tonight. He just wanted to take the opportunity to win a little more. Seeing that Quincy could not deny him, Kevin continued. Besides, I don't want to play with a piece of trash like you. Instead of wasting time with you, I might as well go back downstairs and find a few girls to have a drink. Then let's raise the minimum bet. How about $100,000? Quincy Robbins replied without thinking, irritated by Kevin's insult. The main thing was that in his mind, he did not even consider the possibility that he could lose. He was simply trying to figure out how to bleed the last of Kevin's money out of him as quickly as possible. $100,000? Kevin thought for a moment and nodded reluctantly. Okay, I guess I might as well play a few hands. Quincy was so happy that he almost jumped out of his chair. After the first few hands, Quincy quickly went on a hot streak. In less than 2 minutes, he defeated Kevin 5 or 6 times in a row. I thought you were good. You're even worse than your friend. Quincy Robbins mocked once again. Tyler Dawn shook his head while watching from the side. $100,000 per hand is still too little. Why don't we raise the stakes? Kevin said as he impatiently took another sip of his drink. I originally wanted to play with you slowly. Since you insist on suffering more quickly, then I'll be merciful and grant you your wish. Quincy said as he pushed a large stack of chips to the center of the table. However, when he looked at his cards this time, Quincy Robbins became nervous. Kevin coldly snorted. Without saying anything, he peered at the cards in front of him. A few moments later, Quincy was forced to fold his hand. I'm sorry. Looks like I won. Kevin stood up and swept over all the chips in the center of the table toward him. Although Quincy's heart ached to lose such a huge hand, he still firmly believed in himself. You only won one hand. Let's deal the cards again to see if you have the ability to do it again. He firmly believed that he could win the next several hands. Give me the cards. Kevin pushed all of his chips to the center of the table this time, apparently not caring about the gap between him and Quincy at all. Quincy followed suit, not willing to be outdone. But when the cards were dealt, Kevin's 3 of a kind beat Quincy's pair. No, this is impossible. Quincy Robbins kept shaking his head and said, You must have cheated. Who said that luck can only be on your side? Kevin ignored him and said to the dealer beside him, I'd like to exchange all of my chips. Seeing that Kevin was about to leave, Quincy grabbed his shoulder and shouted, Stop right there. I want to play one last hand. Quincy was clearly not willing to give up just yet. He really could not understand how he could lose 2 hands to Kevin in a row. He was certain that it wouldn't happen a third time. As long as he was given another chance, he would definitely be able to turn the tables. How much are you willing to bet? Kevin glanced at him and asked disdainfully. I am the heir of the Robbins family. I can bet any amount you're willing to match, Quincy said. He had no time to care about anything else except regaining his pride. Oh, so it's Mr. Robbins, is it? My apologies. Kevin smiled and said, Okay then, this time I will bet all of my assets. Kevin took out 2 debit cards as he spoke. The total amount of money in these 2 card accounts is about $300 million. If you don't believe me, you can ask the staff of the casino to check. I just don't think you can match it, can you? I can match it. Let's play, Quincy Robbins said as he stared at the cards with his eyes almost shining. Are you joking with me? I'm not insane. Who would ever risk that much money on a hand of cards? Then what do you want? Quincy demanded as he ran around the table and held his arm, not wanting Kevin to leave. Kevin had $300 million in his hands. If Quincy could win, he knew that his father would look at him in a whole new light. I heard that your family's mansion is quite nice. If you can present the deed of the property, I'll bet with you. It's not worth nearly as much as I'm willing to bet, but why not? Kevin saw that Quincy Robbins had already fallen into the trap, so he told him his real purpose. No, I can't do that. When Quincy Robbins heard that, he shook his head like a rattling drum. Although he wanted to win, he still had some bit of rationality. He added, Besides, my father's name is the one on the property deed. Without his permission, I won't be able to change it over to your name, Quincy explained. Yeah, you're right, Kevin snorted. Tyler Dawn suddenly stepped forward and suggested, I think I have an idea. Ask someone to get a piece of white paper. Mr. Robbins, sign your name on it and make it an IOU. After that, if you lose, you can pay it back slowly. Kevin laughed in his heart, knowing that he was about to ruin yet another family of enemies. Kevin entered into rounds of gambling that had faux Quincy Robbins thinking that Kevin was an easy mark. Until the tables turned, and Quincy suddenly was ready to sign over his family's estate in order to win an easy $300 million from Kevin. Though it was Tyler Dawn who had to concoct a scheme in which Quincy would sign over a house that didn't belong to him. Quincy Robbins nodded as soon as he heard Tyler Dawn's plot. He looked at Tyler Dawn with gratitude, thinking that he couldn't possibly lose again. Kevin said with a sneer, All right, for the sake of my friend, let's do it this way. But I want to record all of this on video. You have to make it clear that you are sober and that you are not being threatened in any way. Otherwise, if you go back on your word in the future, how am I going to prove it? No problem. As long as you are willing to place the bet, I will do whatever you want. Quincy quickly agreed. After that, he asked the dealer to find a pen and let Tyler Dawn draw up the contract. Then, Kevin and Quincy began filming the video. Seeing this scene, the dealer shook his head a few times. When Kevin proposed to get proof of the arrangement on the spot, he had already seen through their intentions. However, he did not dare to say anything. How could he provoke someone who dared to plot against the Robbins family? It's all ready. Mr. Robbins, please sign right here, Tyler said as he handed the pen over to Quincy. Quincy didn't even look at the content and just signed the contract as quickly as he could. Okay, let's play, Kevin said as he casually placed the 2 cards on the table. This is exciting, Quincy said as he looked at Kevin's cards on the table. It will be even more exciting later, Kevin said with a sneer. The dealer dealt with the cards. Quincy looked at the cards in his hands with eager anticipation and revealed a proud smile. Pocket kings! You definitely can't beat that, Quincy Robbins sat back in his chair as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He pointed at Kevin and urged, "Hurry up and turn over your cards." Under normal circumstances, Kevin had a slim chance of beating his hand. Quincy refused to believe that he could possibly have such good luck. "Sorry to let you down, Mr. Robbins," Kevin said as he flipped over 2 aces. The rest of the cards were dealt: a 3 of hearts, an 8 of spades, and a jack of clubs. Kevin had won the hand. At this moment, Quincy Robbins was dumbfounded. He sat still in his chair for a long time without any reaction. "Thank you, Mr. Robbins," Kevin said loudly as he took back his debit cards and was about to leave with all of his chips. When he walked to the door, he did not forget to look back and remind Quincy Robbins, "Tomorrow I will come to your house to collect the money. See you soon." When Quincy Robbins came back to his senses and rushed out of the room, he did not see Kevin and Tyler anywhere. Early the next morning, in the mansion of the Robbins family, all the family members gathered for breakfast.
"What's wrong, Quincy? You don't have an appetite this morning?" asked Patriarch Archie Robbins.
It might be because I got home a bit late last night and I slept in a lot longer than I meant to, so I have no appetite now,"
Quincy answered weakly. Ever since he came back from the casino, Quincy had been in a state of panic. He had lost a huge amount of money. If that man came to collect the debt today, what would his father say? Suddenly, a staff member of the Robbins family ran over.
"Mr. Robbins, Kevin Williams is at the front door requesting an audience," he said to Archie Robbins.
The room fell silent.
"What is he doing here?" Archie Robbins said as he finished chewing. "Kevin said he has something to discuss with you, sir," the man said respectfully. "Fine, then let me go and meet him." Archie Robbins wiped his mouth and asked the man to bring Kevin inside. When Quincy Robbins followed his father to the main hall and saw Kevin's appearance clearly, his expression changed drastically. "I haven't seen you in a few days. How have you been recently?" Kevin said to Archie Robbins as he drank a mouthful of coffee and asked with a fake smile on his face. "Thank you for asking. I've been well. May I ask what brings you here today?"
Archie Robbins questioned coldly. Facing Archie Robbins' attitude, Kevin did not show any reaction. Instead, he looked around the hall, especially at the faces of the other members of his family.
"What are you looking at?" Archie Robbins asked with a slight frown.
"Could it be that your son still hasn't told you?" Kevin pretended to be puzzled as he asked.
"What do you mean? What the hell are you talking about?"
A bad premonition suddenly arose in Archie Robbins' heart. "Last night, when I met your son at the casino, we hit it off like old friends and played a few hands of poker together. However, young Quincy's luck ran out at just the wrong time, and he now owes me quite a substantial amount of money," Kevin said.
"So you are here to collect the debt? How much is it? I'll get someone to write you a check and then you can be on your way."
Archie Robbins glanced at his son before raising his coffee cup without batting an eye. He knew that his son had always liked to gamble a bit. Furthermore, Archie believed that gambling itself had its pros and cons and that it taught the importance of risk-taking. The Robbins family had plenty of assets, so he was more than confident that he could allow his son to gamble a bit. "Not much, just $300 million, Kevin said with a proud smile. The moment Kevin finished his sentence, Archie Robbins spat out the coffee in his mouth in an instant. The other members of the Robbins family who were standing beside him also revealed shocked expressions on their faces.
"What? How much did you say?"
Archie wiped away the coffee from his mouth, his eyes wide open. "Mr. Robbins, why are you so surprised? It's only $300 million. It's not a lot. Certainly not for someone like you. The Robbins family is a very prestigious family in Washington, D.C. I'm sure that such an amount of money is like pocket change to someone like you," Kevin said casually. Almost at the same time as Archie Robbins, all of the other members of the Robbins families turned their heads and looked at Quincy Robbins in a state of panic. It was true that the Robbins family was a big family. They couldn't afford that kind of debt. Was Kevin Williams going to make the whole family bankrupt?
"No, that's impossible. How could I owe you $300 million now? That's not what we agreed to,"
Quincy Robbins roared loudly. "Do you really want to go back on your word? Don't forget that we recorded a video and you signed a contract." As Kevin spoke, he took out the contract from his pocket and casually held it up for all to see. It was written in black and white, signed clearly by both Kevin and Quincy. Looking at the contents of the contract, Archie Robbins' chest heaved violently. "You bastard!" Archie Robbins shouted. He was truly infuriated as he slapped his son hard across the face. "All right. I'm not here to see you teach your son a lesson today. Are you prepared to pay up or what?" Kevin said with a proud smile. Hearing this, Archie Robbins stopped and turned to look at Kevin. What if I don't give it to you? What are you going to do about it?" Without waiting for Kevin to speak, a few police officers quickly walked in. The leader was a handsome man. He got straight to the point and said, "Hello, Mr. Robbins. We have received a report from Mr. Williams. He said that the Robbins family owed him a huge sum of money and that Mr. Williams also had evidence in his possession to this effect. We have come to make sure that the debt is paid." Archie Robbins took a few deep breaths to try to calm himself down. He gave Kevin a deep look. He understood that his son had fallen into Kevin's trap. "Officer, may I ask how you want to proceed?" Archie Robbins clenched his fist tightly and asked. Although his status in the expert world was extraordinary, it did not mean that he felt it was his right to look down on law enforcement. "Right now, you have two choices. First, you can hand over the agreed-upon sum of money to Mr. Williams, or second, you can hand Mr. Quincy Robbins over to the police. At that point, the Robbins family will be entitled to slowly repay the debt, assuming they are not able to repay it in full right now," the police officer said seriously. Although he knew that Archie Robbins was a powerful man with a high power base, he was not afraid. He operated according to evidence and justice.
"Dad, please save me. You have to save me. Please don't let them take me away."
Quincy Robbins stepped forward, hugging his father as he pleaded with him.
"Get out of my way,"
Archie Robbins said as he pushed his son aside. $300 million? Where could he get that kind of money? "I do have an idea, but I don't know if Mr. Robbins would be amenable to it." Kevin sat down in a chair and said leisurely, "I think this house is pretty good. If Mr. Robbins is willing to vacate this house immediately for me, we can discuss the remainder of the debt later. Since Mr. Williams has already made a sizable concession, I wonder if Mr. Robbins is willing to oblige?" the police officer asked seriously. In fact, he wanted Archie Robbins to agree. Not many people knew that when the police received Kevin's report this morning, everyone in the bureau exploded. Not many people were willing to intervene in this matter. "What do you say, Mr. Robbins? If you are unwilling to comply, we will have to go to court. If I decide to make this matter bigger, it won't be good for your family," Kevin said. Archie Robbins' expression suddenly became very ugly. He finally knew Kevin's purpose. This was all an effort to give him a taste of his own medicine. Not long ago, Archie Robbins had used a similar method against him. He did not expect Kevin's counterattack to be so fast. The Robbins family's mansion had been passed down for generations. But if he did not agree to what Kevin said, the entire Robbins family would be essentially bankrupt.
I will leave."
Archie Robbins gritted his teeth and spat out these three words. His eyes were filled with hatred and defeat as he looked at Kevin. However, compared to the destruction of his entire family, he had no choice but to make such a decision. Having received Archie Robbins' reply, the police officer in the lead, as well as all the others, heaved a huge sigh of relief. "Then don't just stand there staring blankly into the distance. Hurry up and move out." Kevin put down the coffee cup in his hand and urged him. This was like ripping someone's heart right out of their chest. Archie Robbins was so angry that he actually almost threw up. His vision suddenly turned black and he fainted. Under the watchful eyes of the police officers, the Robbins family began packing up their things and leaving the house that had been theirs for decades. Soon, the news of what happened to the Robbins family spread throughout the entire city, causing a violent shockwave. Kevin didn't have time to wait. He knew that he had to strike while the iron was hot. He set up a banquet and invited all of the most influential people in the city. When they arrived, the few people who had not yet heard about what had happened to the Robbins family were so shocked that they didn't come back to their senses for several minutes. "Don't look at me like that," Kevin smiled as he walked around the dining table and poured wine for all of them. They looked at each other and saw deep shock in each other's eyes. After a long pause, Alexander Smart let out a breath and asked, "Mr. Williams, the rumors are true? Do you really own the Robbins family's mansion now?" "What's there to be so surprised about? Do you really think that only the Robbins family is in a position to plot against me, and I'm not allowed to fight back?" Kevin busied himself and sat back down in his chair. He sneered and said, "Mr. Smart, surely you can appreciate the situation I've found myself in."
"So, Mr. Williams, why did you call us here today?"
Michael Rafferty asked straightforwardly. "Since you asked, I won't hide anything anymore. Today, I have invited all of you here to discuss an alliance." Kevin rubbed his hands and said, "I have mentioned it to all of you before. Now I have also demonstrated my strength. What do all of you think?" Kevin's intention was not a surprise to anyone. However, hearing it with their own ears was something else altogether.
"Mr. Williams, I have to admit that what you have done is indeed unbelievable. However, isn't it too early to say that you want to form an alliance?"
Donald Murphy said with a serious face. "Why do you say that? When do you think would be the right time?" Kevin frowned slightly and asked with some displeasure. And Donald Murphy suddenly knew that being on Kevin Williams' wrong side was perhaps one of the worst fates that could await any man. Kevin went to the Robbins mansion to reveal to a horrified Archie Robbins that Quincy had gambled away $300 million. But Kevin, the winner of the pot, would accept the family's mansion and their exit from D.C. in exchange. Gloating, Kevin held a banquet at which he attempted to forge others into an alliance with him now that he had gained more power in the city. However, Kevin's new would-be allies didn't realize a very serious problem. Usually, Kevin would appear friendly in front of them, but none of them forgot that Kevin was a level 7 expert. Now, even the Robbins family had suffered a great loss at his hands. There was no telling what could happen to their respective families. Now, when Kevin revealed his spiritual energy, even though it was just a little bit, even Donald Murphy, who was now a wise and experienced old man, didn't dare to refute him. The world of any expert was not the same world as the world of ordinary people, not to mention the world of a level 7 powerhouse. Strictly speaking, someone like Kevin was not even supposed to exist in an ordinary world. According to the law, Kevin should have already gone to the upper realm. When I first arrived in Washington, I did not have many achievements under my belt. You could all look down on me as you wished, but now I have proven myself. I understand if it's still too early to tell me now, but please don't treat me as if I was born yesterday. Kevin's tone suddenly became serious. He slightly pressed the cup in his hand down onto the table. George Eubanks sat in a chair with his head lowered and kept silent. No one knew what he was thinking. Herman Thompson showed a troubled look on his face and looked back and forth between Donald Murphy and each of the others. Michael Rafferty, Alexander Smart, and Donald Murphy looked to be deep in thought. They seemed to be seriously considering whether they should stand on Kevin's side. I did not invite all of you here today just to eat. Those who are willing to form an alliance, I invite you to stay behind and discuss it further with me. Those who are unwilling, leave immediately. In the future, if we meet on opposite sides, don't blame me for showing no mercy. He had always been too polite for his own good at times. Today, he had to be truly domineering. He had to make his position absolutely clear so that he wouldn't get tangled up with other things in the future.
"Mr. Williams, I support you."
George Eubanks, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly looked up and said, as he looked directly at Kevin, he said,
"Frankly speaking, even if I don't make a commitment, people on the outside will think that we are on the same side. In that case, why shouldn't I commit fully?"
Alexander Smart said with a smile, "My family also supports you. However, I would like to invite you to please come to my home when the time comes." Kevin nodded his head lightly. According to his understanding, the person who was truly in charge of the Smart family wasn't Alexander. But since he was able to express his stance here today, it was obvious that he had gotten his family's support. As for the trip to the Smart family home, it would be nothing more than negotiating the exact terms. In this way, 2 out of the 5 families had already expressed their stance. As for the Thompson family, there was no need to even talk about it. Their position was already inseparable from Kevin's. In this way, only the Rafferty family and the Murphy family were left.
Mr. Williams, please forgive me. As a member of the Herbalist Society, if I lead my family to seek refuge with another major power, it would be hard to explain it to them.
Michael Rafferty spoke vaguely, but the meaning of his refusal was clear. When everyone's eyes fell upon Donald Murphy, they saw him shaking his head subtly. Although he didn't say anything, he had already made up his mind. Everyone has their own ambitions, so I won't force you. Kevin sighed slightly and raised the glass in front of him. He said, "After drinking this glass of wine, some of us will be a family. As for your 2 families, please be careful. Don't offend me." What happened after that naturally did not have anything to do with Donald Murphy and Michael Rafferty. The 2 of them left quietly. Kevin sent a message to Tyler Dawn and asked him to bring the proposal over. Terry Watford also came with him.
According to Mr. Williams, we will build a consortium. I have invited some others to join us. The core of the consortium will be our pharmaceutical endeavors,
Tyler said as he distributed the information in his hands to them.
The main launch will be a new pill provided by Mr. Williams. It has considerable potential for both heart disease and leukemia treatment.
Just as Kevin was listening to Tyler's introduction, he suddenly received a message from Matthew Thames. Kevin and the others discussed for a few more minutes, then he quickly left. When he returned home, Donald Murphy went straight to his study. He looked at the phone in front of him and hesitated for a long time before dialing a number. It took a long time before the call was connected. He heard a low voice on the other end.
"Mr. Murphy, for you to be able to make this call, can I take it that you finally figured it out and severed your relationship with Kevin?" "Cut the crap. I've already rejected Kevin's invitation today. He wants to establish a club or some sort of commercial organization. According to what you said before, can you let my grandson go now?"
Donald Murphy asked with a gloomy expression. A long time ago, Donald Murphy had received a call from this mysterious man saying that he had kidnapped his son Carson. At that time, Donald Murphy didn't think that they were even serious. But later on, Donald Murphy gradually realized that he had indeed been kidnapped and that things were not as simple as they appeared. In order to find out Carson Murphy's whereabouts, he had sent more than 10 groups of people, but every time they came back empty-handed, if they even came back at all. However, the only request made by the kidnappers was that Donald Murphy sever the relationship between his family and Kevin.
"Don't worry, Mr. Murphy. I have another request, but I do need you to show your sincerity."
The person on the other end of the phone sneered.
"What do you want from me? Kevin is a level 7 expert. If we fight him head-on, my entire family wouldn't even be able to lay a finger on him."
Donald Murphy growled in a low voice.
"It seems like you are not sincere enough after all. I'll give you 10 days to think about it. I can't guarantee what will happen to your grandson."
After saying that, the man hung up the phone. Hearing the dial tone of the phone, Donald Murphy suddenly slapped the table. He hadn't been challenged in years. How had he found himself in this situation now? However, Carson Murphy was his only grandson. If he didn't do everything in his power to rescue him, what kind of man would he be? Donald slumped down into a chair. He was already an old man, but now he felt as helpless as a child. At the same time, after Kevin left the meeting with the heads of the 5 families, he went straight to the base of the Reaper Squad. Under Scott Whitney's lead, he went straight to where Matthew Thames was. "Tell me, what do you want from me? I still have something to deal with, so make it quick," Kevin said bluntly as he looked at Matthew Thames, sat down in a chair, and crossed his legs.
"I have seen your mentor. He promised that you would help us."
Matthew Thames casually glanced at him and replied. Kevin stood up from his chair. "What did you say? That old man didn't ask for anything from you in return.
He just agreed to offer me up just like that?
I wouldn't exactly say that. I had to sell it for a while. But in the end, he found that there would be some benefits to you as well.
Matthew Thames licked his lips and said,
Is this your chance, Kevin?
What if I don't see it that way? What if this is a trap you dug for me?
Kevin stared at him coldly and said, And how can I believe that you actually spoke to him at all? What if you were just lying to me? Kevin said, growing agitated.
If I knew you would say that, I would have shown you this sooner.
Matthew Thames said as he immediately took out a ring. Kevin looked serious when he saw the ring because the ring in Matthew Thames's hand was the Night King's signature ring. It was also because of this ring that he had become mixed up with the Myriads. It seems that what you said is true. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given you this ring, Kevin said as he swallowed and lowered his head. He sat back down in the chair. He looked as if he was an animal waiting to be slaughtered. Tell me what you want me to do, he said. His change of attitude made Matthew Thames laugh out loud.
We found out that they have a laboratory located in a small town about 15 miles outside of D.C., but we don't know the exact location. Your objective is to find the lab and destroy it. Also find any and all evidence and information regarding the Mavericks at that location and bring it back,
Matthew Thames said with an impassioned tone. Damn, seems like you guys don't know anything, do you? You only tell me that there's a lab somewhere in the area, and then you need me to find everything else by myself? Kevin asked loudly with grief and indignation.
Young man, don't be so angry. This is a test for you, and also a rare experience for you to learn.
Matthew Thames lectured him earnestly. Why don't you go and get some experience? All right, well, it would be best if you give me a few people to come with me, Kevin said as he crossed his arms in front of his chest and angrily turned his head to the side. He was extremely annoyed when he looked at these two old men. No problem. We'll have Stanley Cooper go with you, Scott Whitney said as if it was only natural. Kevin slowly turned his head and looked at Scott with a smile that was not really a smile at all. Scott, you're a smart guy. You wouldn't want someone close to you to come with me. If there is an accident, don't blame me. Scott Whitney's expression didn't change. When carrying out a mission, you must be brave and take the lead. If there is an accident, you can't blame anyone else. All right, let's go. I want to leave immediately, Kevin said. About an hour later, Kevin and Stanley left the Reaper Squad's base. In order to conceal their identities, the two of them had fake IDs made by professionals. Is the Reaper Squad's budget shrinking or something? Why did they give us such a crappy car? Kevin asked as he covered his ears because the car was so loud.
It can't be helped. All the good cars are taken. Besides, for this mission, it's good to keep a low profile,
Stanley replied in a matter-of-fact tone. Kevin really wanted to curse. However, no matter how unhappy he was, Kevin could only accept it for now. After all, who was he to say no to his mentor? After about half an hour, the two of them arrived in the town that Matthew Thames had mentioned. What surprised Kevin was that although this place was not that far from D.C., it gave him a desolate feeling. The streets were full of potholes and buildings were run down or even abandoned all around them. There were not many people in the town, and it seemed very rare to see any children at all. Looking around, most of the people they saw were at least in their 30s or 40s, or even elderly people.
Do you feel that something isn't right here?
Stanley said as he drove the car slowly and looked around. In order to stay in town for the night, they had made detailed plans to arrive at around 7 o'clock in the evening. Let's just find a place to stay first, Kevin said with a serious expression. He was still actually somewhat impressed by the Mavericks. They had actually set up a laboratory in such a desolate town. It would be difficult for ordinary people to think twice about it, and just as difficult for experts to find it. Although the town was old and dilapidated, it was fortunate that it was so close to Washington, D.C. However, there was only one small motel. The room was not big. There were only 2 beds and a small TV. The paint on the walls had begun to chip from being so old. The lights outside the room were a little dim and the whole building had a musty odor to it. Stanley Cooper vigilantly looked up and down the walkway outside the motel. After making sure that there were no suspicious people around, Stanley went back inside and skillfully checked the room again to ensure that there were no monitoring devices. After all, if the Mavericks' research lab was really here in this town, they had to take every precaution. The Mavericks were not known for showing their enemies any mercy. After reluctantly agreeing to go along with Matthew Thames's plan to go to a small town just outside of Washington to find the Mavericks' secret research laboratory, Kevin set off with Stanley Cooper. They were given fake IDs in an old car so that they could blend in and fly under the radar. When they arrived in the town, they were both surprised to see that there were no children around, and almost everyone they saw was in their 30s, 40s, or older. They found the only motel in town and checked into a dilapidated room. Stanley vigilantly checked their surroundings and swept the room for any monitoring devices, taking every precaution to make sure there were no threats. Stanley and Kevin's skills were indeed extraordinary, but after all, they were deep in the territory of the Mavericks. They were here to find and destroy their research laboratory and obtain conclusive evidence of wrongdoing. Ideally, they would be able to get in and get out. They weren't here to fight, but Kevin was prepared to do so if it came to that. Therefore, they could not overlook even the most insignificant detail. Kevin was half lying on the bed with his hands behind his head. He said with a thoughtful look, "From the moment we drove into this town and got out of the car, I found that there were 4 things that didn't seem right. Tell me what you noticed."
"No problem."
Stanley sat down on the other bed and thought about it as he said,
"When we got to town, there were 4 or 5 strongmen sitting under a tree playing cards. But there was no cash on the table, and from the moment we appeared, it seemed like they were watching our every move. I think I noticed one of them even taking pictures with his phone."
Kevin nodded and said, "I noticed that at one of the only restaurants in town there was barely anyone eating on the first floor, but when we passed by I heard a lot of noise coming from upstairs. Obviously there were many people on the second floor." Stanley frowned and said,
"There are cameras all over the streets. In a small town like this, there's no reason for every electric pole to be full of cameras. There are almost no blind spots at all."
"The last thing I'm curious about is, when we checked in, the motel owner seemed to be an ordinary person on the surface. However, there are large calluses on only his right hand, which is probably caused by holding a sword for a long time." Kevin bit his lower lip and said in a low voice. The two of them agreed with everything the other had said. After quickly summarizing the 4 problems they had noticed in his mind, Kevin's expression suddenly changed. He hurriedly sat up from the bed and stretched out his right hand to signal Stanley not to make any sound. He stared at the door silently. He had clearly heard a sound outside the door. Suddenly, a gentle knock could be heard. Stanley instantly reacted, and his entire body tensed up. Kevin walked to the door slowly and softly. Spiritual energy was circulating rapidly in his body to ensure that he would be able to react at the first possible moment if anything happened. Kevin slowly held the handle and then suddenly opened the door. He almost threw the person on the other side of the door into the room before he realized that it was the owner of the motel.
What are you doing here? I mean, do you need something?"
Stanley asked in surprise. The middle-aged man also looked embarrassed. He paused for a long time before he came back to his senses. "I just wanted to ask if you need anything." "Oh, yes. Thank you for asking. I just took a look and it seems that there's something wrong with the toilet. Can you get someone to take a look?" Kevin asked with a smile. "No problem. The facilities here are quite old, but I can take a look. Let me go get some tools and I'll look at it right away," the man said with a smile. However, before he could turn around, he was suddenly stunned. The smile on his face instantly disappeared, and his pupil shrank to the size of a needle. There was a shared bathroom at the end of the walkway, and there was no toilet in the room. The man wanted to run the next second, but Kevin had already reached out and grabbed his shoulder. Stanley rushed over from the bed and covered the man's mouth and nose with his right hand. His other arm hugged his body and forcefully pulled him into the room. Kevin half stretched out his body and looked outside the door. When he found no one there, he slowly closed the door behind him. "Tell me, you didn't even realize that the rooms here don't have individual bathrooms? Are all Mavericks as dumb as you?" Kevin shook his head and sighed. The middle-aged man kept struggling and making whining sounds, but he could not break out of Stanley Cooper's restraints no matter what he did. "I'll give you one chance and one chance only. Do not lie to me. I'm warning you. Tell me about the situation in this town," Kevin said as his face suddenly became serious. He took out the night dagger from behind his back and pressed it against the man's neck. "Don't blame me for not warning you in advance. Don't even dare make any sound. Be careful. Your life is in danger."
"If you understand, just nod your head twice."
Stanley lowered his voice and warned.
"Don't think that we won't dare to kill you."
The man was obviously afraid. He nodded his head twice very slowly. After all, not everyone could be truly unafraid of death. Meanwhile, in the mansion of the Steele family back in Chicago, Dalton Steele had just finished a training session and walked out into the hallway. Someone came forward to report that someone wanted to see him and was already waiting for him in the living room. When Dalton saw the person who was waiting for him, he stopped short for a moment. Then his expression gradually became strange. He sat down, crossed his legs, and said,
"What a rare treat. It's nice to see you. May I know what brings you here today?"
The person who came to see Dalton Steele was none other than the young heir of the Williams family, Ethan Williams. He had come all the way from New York City. After being taught a lesson by his father, Ethan's resentment toward Kevin had reached its peak. During this period of time, he had been trying to find out more and more about Kevin, hoping to find someone strong enough to help him get rid of Kevin. Unfortunately, he couldn't find anyone who would be willing to help him even after asking around for so long. Not long ago, he suddenly found out that Dalton Steele had some kind of a recent conflict with Kevin, and that he was now in Chicago causing chaos all over the city. This made Ethan extremely happy, especially because he was well aware of how close Dalton had been with Kevin, and so he rushed over as soon as he heard. "Mr. Steele, you are now the most powerful figure in all of Chicago. In front of you, I'm just an ant. The pleasure is all mine." Ethan politely smiled and said,
Since when did you become so good at talking?"
Dalton Steele glanced at him as his expression immediately changed and a scowl appeared on his face. He said coldly,
"If you have something to say it quickly. Don't waste my time with flattery."
"Well, you are certainly straightforward. Then I won't be long-winded anymore," Ethan said seriously. "I heard that you and Kevin have had something of a falling out, so I came to Chicago to help you. I want to destroy him. I will do whatever it takes. I want to take the Williams Company away from him and cripple him financially." Dalton Steele turned around and looked at him in surprise.
"Do you really think you have the capability of doing that?"
"Of course, Mr. Steele. Don't forget that the Williams Company was originally completely under my control. However, that arrogant fool Kevin took advantage of the situation and took it away from my father," Ethan said as he patted his chest and added, "I still have a few trusted people in the Williams Company. With their help on the inside, I can take over again." Ethan, who was getting a little carried away by his excitement, did not notice that when he called Kevin an arrogant fool, a murderous look flashed across Dalton Steele's narrowed eyes for a split second, before it disappeared.
"In that case, I will give you a chance. Let me see what you can do,"
Dalton Steele said with a sneer. "No problem. I've already contacted my people in the Williams Company. We will be meeting at 6:30 tonight. I'll send you the address. I hope you can join us at that time," Ethan said as he stood up happily and left Dalton behind him. The moment he walked out of the door, Dalton Steele's smile disappeared, and the expression on his face turned as cold as ice. No one could play Dalton Steele for a fool, especially not an incompetent idiot like Ethan Williams. In Chicago, Dalton Steele was surprised to get a visit from Ethan Williams, Kevin's cousin and the weak and unskilled son of the Williams family head Thomas Williams. Ethan had heard that Dalton was on the outs with Ethan's rival Kevin, and he hoped to forge an alliance to rise up against him. And though indeed Dalton had recently been suspicious of Kevin, this talk of an alliance reminded him of this loyalty to Kevin, who had to be protected from traitors. Meanwhile, in the hotel in the old rundown town not far outside of Washington, it had become clear that the middle-aged man was not as honest as he looked on the surface. He had tried to make some noise to attract attention and then tried to escape, but the end result of his efforts was he was being tortured by Stanley Cooper. However, he was not aware of the Reaper Squad's unique interrogation method. At that moment, the man was lying on the ground, seemingly on the verge of death. His weak eyes could only be half open, but Stanley Cooper had caught and tortured many an attacker over his lifetime, and he knew better than to believe that this enemy was actually near death and therefore not dangerous.
I'm going to give you one last warning. I don't have the time to waste with you here. Answer our questions honestly, otherwise I will make you wish you were already dead.
Stanley wiped down the silver needle in his hand and said with a sense of caution. The man nodded with difficulty. He did not dare to test them anymore as he realized his playing dead game had not fooled these competitors for a moment. It might be better to spill what he knew about the plot against them and save his own life before being killed by his peers for his failure.
Tell me your name. What is your position in the Mavericks? How many people do you have in this town? Where is the laboratory?
Stanley coldly asked a series of questions.
My name is Arthur Block, a member of Team 2 sent here by the Mavericks. We have a total of 48 people hiding in the town. They are made up of a logistics group of 7, a 5-man surveillance team, and 2 7-man patrol teams. The other 20 people are all part of combat teams.
The man answered as he tried to catch his breath. Not all of his exhaustion and defeat was an act. He had been seriously harmed in his battle with Stanley Cooper and Kevin. It seems like you're being too easy on him, Stanley. This man is obviously telling us nothing that we can verify one way or the other, Kevin said as he turned his back on the man. He then stepped toward Arthur Block quickly and squatted down. He slapped him on the head hard and suddenly. Kevin then grabbed Arthur Block's hair, which was soaked in sweat because of the agony he had been enduring.
Do you think you are really that smart, or do you think we are really that stupid?
Arthur asked. Kevin retorted. All 48 of them were arranged in such a perfect manner? Where did the people in the laboratory come from? Could it be that you kidnapped people from rural areas where they wouldn't be missed and used them to conduct your experiments? Kevin yelled as if he was expecting an answer, but Arthur Block knew not to give him one immediately. Kevin was probably going to continue to beat him whether he responded truthfully or not. Stanley Cooper only came to a realization when he heard his rebuttal. By now, Arthur Block had recovered his senses enough to know that Kevin would only accept the truth.
I didn't lie to you. The staff of the research lab doesn't really coordinate with us, and I don't know where they came from. Those people never leave the research lab. Every day, people will be responsible for bringing them food and drinks,
Arthur explained. He was completely panicked. He was afraid of what Kevin was capable of. Then tell me the exact location of the research lab, Kevin demanded in a voice that was heavy with threat and danger.
It's in the center of town. There's a hotel.
Arthur's desire to survive had completely exploded.
The entrance to the research lab is in the basement, but don't even think about going inside.
Oh? Why is that? Kevin asked with a sneer.
There are 10 people guarding the basement of the hotel at all times every day. The moment they notice or discover anything unusual at all, they will contact the people in the research lab immediately. The door will be closed immediately. The door is made of a special alloy. There's no way you'll be able to break through it,
Arthur said, having explained everything he knew without hiding anything. Who is the most powerful expert on the research team? Kevin asked with some interest. Kevin knew that it was always wise to target the top of any organization, whether it was a crime group, a government organization, or a lab overseeing research that inflicted pain and suffering on innocent citizens.
It's the leader of each group. There are a total of 4 leaders, and all of them are very powerful,
Arthur answered timidly. After hearing his answer, Kevin and Stanley looked at each other.
The guard's strength is indeed not low. It will be very difficult to get past them.
Stanley frowned slightly and said with a serious expression. Although Stanley exaggerated the abilities of the 4 group leaders in front of Arthur, they still could not be dealt with immediately. If Kevin and Stanley got tangled with any of them for even a moment too long, the rest of them would have enough time to destroy the evidence. Kevin rubbed his chin and thought seriously for a moment. He leaned toward Stanley and said softly, "Leave the 4 of them to me. Find a way to lure them out, and then you can take the opportunity to go in and search for the evidence."
"Can you do it?"
Stanley asked worriedly. "Of course," Kevin said in a way that indicated to Stanley Cooper that Kevin was annoyed he had even been doubted by his Reaper colleague. Then he turned around and looked at Arthur Block. "Let me ask you one last question. Do the 4 team leaders ever gather all together at the same time?" Arthur nodded and said,
"The 4 team leaders eat dinner on the 2nd floor of the restaurant down the street almost every day at 7 o'clock.
"Thank you for your cooperation. It's just that for our operation, we need you to stay quiet for a while." Kevin then hit the man on the back of the head and knocked him unconscious.
"What should we do now? Should we go and find them right now?"
Stanley asked with a serious expression. "What are you panicking about? Didn't you hear him say that the 4 group leaders get together at 7? Kevin laid back on the bed, looked at the ceiling, and said thoughtfully, "That sounds like a good time for a meal." As he spoke, a strange smile suddenly appeared on Kevin's face. Stanley did not exactly know why, but when he saw this, he felt a wave of fear in his heart.
What do you want to do?"
Stanley asked curiously. Kevin snorted lightly and took out a purple-red flower from his bag. This flower contains a very unique compound. Don't pay any attention to its bright color. If you grind it into a powder after drying it, it will be just an ordinary odorless white powder that dissolves in any liquid. If you put it in soup or water and let people eat or drink it, even elite experts will have debilitating diarrhea and become almost too weak to stand. Kevin showed it to Stanley Cooper while circulating his spiritual energy to extract all of the water from the flower. He then ground it down into a powder and stored it in a small bottle. "Stanley, do you people from the Reaper Squad know much about disguises?" Kevin suddenly asked with an evil smile.
"You want me to dress up like this person, then sneak into the restaurant and mix the powder into their drinks?"
Stanley asked as he could barely hide his annoyance at being sent on a fool's errand by Kevin. "There is no need to say everything so clearly," Kevin smiled. "When they all rush to the bathroom, the 2 of us will be able to get into the research lab effortlessly."
"Leave it to me,"
Stanley said as he squatted on the ground and carefully studied Arthur Block's appearance. Then he took out the tools needed for the makeup. Half an hour later, 2 nearly identical Arthur Blacks appeared in the room. "Not bad, Stanley," Kevin said with a sigh.
"I'm glad you approve,"
Stanley said. His voice was exactly the same as Arthur's. All right. You can go now. If you come across any trouble, just let me know. I will come and save you right away," Kevin said as he pushed Stanley out of the room. Kevin loved nothing more than getting revenge on someone like Arthur Block, an ineffectual maverick who underestimated Kevin's intelligence and powers and nearly paid for that error with his life. After forcing the information they needed about the research lab out of Arthur Block, Kevin knocked him unconscious and asked Stanley if the Reaper Squad was familiar with disguises. In short order, Stanley had transformed himself into a virtual clone of Arthur, complete with a digitally enhanced voice box to make him sound just like Block. Kevin's plan was to have Stanley slip the 4 lab group leaders a powder that induced severe diarrhea during their dinner that evening. Then, while they rushed off to the bathroom, Kevin would have an opening to break into the research lab, while the four most powerful experts that could get in his way were completely incapacitated. At 6:30 p.m., Stanley Cooper, who was disguised as Arthur Block, strolled through the center of town before arriving at the restaurant. At this time, there were not many people on the first floor of the restaurant. There were 4 or 5 elderly people sitting together. In the park out in front of the restaurant, 2 people were playing a game of chess, while another older man was standing next to them pointing at the chessboard. The man was shaking his head, looking like he was trying to give the 2 of them pointers. Stanley Cooper and Kevin had been in town long enough to know that this quaint scene was far from that. It was surely one staged by the Mavericks as a way of keeping an eye on the 2, as they invaded their territory to get information on their lab activities. Stanley Cooper walked past them and into the restaurant. He didn't stay on the first floor for too long. However, he heard some noise as soon as he arrived on the second floor. In the kitchen, which was clearly viewable to the diners, 6 or 7 chefs were busy cooking. They were stirring sauces in pots and grilling meat, and the sound of flames could be heard clearly from the open kitchen. Many people had already taken a seat at the bar on the second floor. Several bottles of beer were placed on the counter in front of them, and more than 10 men were gathered together drinking and talking loudly. At that moment, one of them noticed Stanley Cooper despite the dark ambience on the second floor. He got up and walked over to him with a bottle of wine in his hand. He looked at Stanley and asked,
"Hey Arthur, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at the motel for another hour?"
Stanley quickly reacted. He didn't let anything past him. His Reaper training was ingrained in his spirit by now.
What's the worst that can happen at the motel right now? There have only been 2 idiots who have checked in all day. I have nothing to do there, so I figured I'd go get a drink,"
Stanley said as he slapped the man's shoulder and spoke in a hearty manner.
"Kid, be careful. I heard that the leader of Team 2 has some negative comments about you. Don't let him catch you."
The man raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine as he advised.
"Don't worry about me,"
Stanley said as he smiled and was about to walk towards the bar. But before he could turn around and walk a few steps, the man suddenly raised his voice and said,
"Stop."
Hearing this, Stanley's eyes flashed with panic. He did not feel that he had revealed any flaws that could have caused him to be seen through so quickly.
What's wrong?"
Stanley turned around and asked with some hesitation. The man looked around suspiciously. Seeing that he did not notice anyone looking at them, he walked to Stanley again and quietly handed a pack of cigarettes to him.
"Could you set me up with a decent room for tonight?"
the man said with a pleading tone. His eyes were full of expectation. Stanley looked at the cigarettes in his hand. He put it in his pocket and wrapped it with spiritual energy.
"I have to go back and take a look first. If possible, I will arrange it for you."
"Thank you, brother. I'll treat you to dinner when we get back to DC."
The man patted Stanley Cooper's shoulder a few times before he happily returned to his seat. Stanley secretly heaved a sigh of relief before he turned on his heels and walked quickly toward the dining room. When the meal was ready, the group leaders went to the private dining room one after another. The food that night was very sumptuous. After eating and drinking to their heart's content, they all sat back in their seats and sighed like fatted pigs. Suddenly, one person's face changed drastically. He covered his stomach with both of his hands and said,
"I don't feel so great. Why does my stomach hurt so much?"
Along with a few gurgling sounds coming from his gut, the man jumped up from the chair with a whoosh. He held his stomach and quickly ran into the bathroom. He wasn't the only one who reacted this way. Soon, a gurgling sound came from the stomachs of everyone in the entire private dining room.
"What the hell? My stomach is hurting too,"
one of the men said. "I can't take it anymore. I have to go to the bathroom," said another.
"I think we have food poisoning,"
complained another.
"It must be food poisoning. How else could so many people have stomach aches?"
The leader of Group 2 covered his stomach and said with a pained expression,
"It's most likely because the ingredients tonight weren't fresh."
The leader of Group 3 groaned while gnashing his teeth in anger. The other two group leaders' expressions weren't very good either. They each had a strange and stiff posture as if they couldn't move freely. At the same time, in a large cypress tree outside the restaurant, Kevin, who was hiding in the branches and leaves, heard several men crying out in agony. The corner of his mouth couldn't help but spread into a sly smile. The power of the powder he had given them was not something to take lightly. However, Kevin didn't care about those men. He kept a close eye on the 4 team leaders in the private dining room. They were probably desperately trying to hold it in. When one of them finally gave in and said that he was going to the bathroom, the other 3 men finally relented and agreed. The bathroom in the restaurant was filled with an awful smell. Everyone who had been slipped the powder by Stanley Cooper was in a lot of pain as their bowels nearly exploded. Kevin seized the opportunity to sneak into the restaurant. After finding the entrance to the basement, Kevin pulled out the night dagger and quickly found the door that was sealed by several iron chains. What entered Kevin's line of sight next was a very deep tunnel. The width could only allow 1 adult to enter at a time. There was an ordinary lamp on the top of the tunnel that was emitting a faint yellow light. Kevin did not even think about it and quickly stepped into the tunnel. After about 10 minutes, the 4 team leaders returned to the private dining room from the bathroom. Their faces were pale, and they seemed to be powerless as they sat down in their chairs. The chefs all stood before them with their heads buried deeply against their chests. Their bodies kept trembling, and they didn't even dare to look up at the team leaders in front of them.
You are all suspects at this point. Tell me what happened to the food tonight. Everyone is having diarrhea,
the second group leader yelled in a cold voice. Sir, we don't know what's going on either. There was nothing unusual about tonight's meal. A chef answered in a voice that begged forgiveness even though he knew he wasn't guilty of anything.
That's ridiculous. Why else did this happen then?
After one of the team leaders said this loudly, he took a deep breath. The moment he raised his voice, he felt that his stomach had a reaction again. There seemed to be an inexplicable force pulling him back to the bathroom. Meanwhile, Kevin, who had snuck into the underground tunnel, had been walking along the passageway for more than 10 minutes. However, the path was rugged, and there seemed to be no end to it in sight. Suddenly, Kevin stopped walking and looked at a mark on the wall that had been cut by a knife. He frowned. This looked just like the mark he had made using the night dagger when he had just come down into the tunnel. Did I go in a big circle? How could I be back where I started? Kevin thought to himself as he considered whether there was anything else unusual he had encountered on the path that he had walked. No. Kevin calmed himself down and quickly spread out the power of his mind in all directions. However, the result surprised him. The seemingly ordinary walls all around him could completely block his spiritual energy, causing him to be unable to detect anything beyond the walls of the tunnel. Just as Kevin was hesitating, a voice suddenly sounded. Rarely had Kevin ever felt that his powers wouldn't protect him and that he might be in mortal danger. After Stanley Cooper, disguised to look like Arthur Block, poisoned the food of the 4 group leaders with the powder of a flower that induced severe diarrhea, all 4 of them rushed to the bathroom. As soon as they were gone, Kevin slipped inside and made his way to the basement of the building. He found a long, dimly lit tunnel and started making his way down it. However, after a while, he noticed a mark on the wall that looked just like the mark he had made with the night dagger when he had first entered the tunnel. Questioning whether he had just gone in a big circle, he then spread out his spiritual energy in all directions, but it seemed as though the ordinary-looking walls of the tunnel were able to completely block it. Then Kevin heard a voice. 4 figures slowly walked out from an opening in the tunnel and looked to their left and right. They pressed down hard on the wall in an area about the size of a hand. The wall of the tunnel slowly returned to its original state, concealing the opening from which they had come. I heard that the food tonight isn't bad. Let's hurry up and get some for the researchers, one of the people said. Okay, let's go, another answered. A third man was also complaining about something as they left, so they didn't realize that Kevin had slowly approached. Kevin walked up to the spot where the people had appeared and pressed down on the wall in the same place that they had. A secret opening appeared again. Kevin's mouth curled into a smile and he walked in. At the same time, the interrogation of the chefs by the 4 team leaders in the private dining room was underway.
You mean Arthur Block came into the kitchen while you were cooking?
The leader of Group 3 frowned slightly and asked thoughtfully. There was no reason for Arthur Block to be in the kitchen, surely, and yet he couldn't believe that there would be a deceitful reason for his presence. Surely Arthur couldn't be behind the food poisoning, or could he? Yes, when Arthur came into the kitchen, we didn't pay much attention to him. After all, it was almost time for dinner and he was just looking for the bathroom and had apparently gotten turned around. But now that I think about it, other than Block, no one else who wasn't supposed to be there entered the kitchen the entire evening, a chef said while wiping the cold sweat on his forehead with trembling hands.
Something's not right. Arthur Block has been here plenty of times. Why would he be wandering around like that?
The leader of Group 4 said with a slight frown. Suddenly, the leader of Group 4 stood up from his chair.
This is not good. I feel like we've fallen into a trap. Come with me.
The leader of Group 4 immediately ran toward the basement after saying that. The others followed after him after they realized what had happened. When they came to the basement, they saw that the iron chains concealing the door were broken on the ground. A few people were walking out of the tunnel. When they saw the team leaders, they immediately stood up straight.
You guys just came up from down below?
The team leader asked seriously.
Yes,
one of them answered weakly.
Did you notice any suspicious people? Anyone who shouldn't have been down there?
The Team 2 leader asked.
No, we didn't see anyone. We're just here to get the food for the research team. We didn't see any suspicious people along the way.
Another one of the people scratched the back of his head and asked nervously. Looking at the iron chains on the ground, the leader of the Group 4 frowned.
Let's go down and take a look. It's not going to be good if something happens,
the leader of Group 3 suddenly suggested. The rest of them nodded and quickly entered the underground tunnel. Meanwhile, in Chicago, ever since Dalton Steele's rise, the whole situation in the city had undergone a tremendous change. Currently, there were only 2 major powers in Chicago. One of them was naturally the group led by Dalton Steele, and the other was the group led by the Williams Company. In Dalton Steele's territory, the new Era Hotel was decorated beautifully. The name of the hotel was decided on by Dalton Steele himself, and the meaning was clear. He wanted to surpass Kevin. When it was almost time for the meeting to begin, Ethan Williams brought a man into a private room.
Mr. Steele, it's good to see you,
Ethan said as he sat down in a chair, took out a cigar, and lit it up, as if he was smoking the most expensive bit of tobacco ever created. Ethan was a man who could be termed a pretender to the throne, and behind his back most people laughed at him. Dalton Steele just glanced at him lightly and then looked at the other person.
What's your name? What position do you hold in the Williams Company?
Dalton's lips moved slightly as he asked.
My name is Andre Hernandez. I am currently the deputy manager of the Research and Development Department at the Williams Company. I've seen you a few times at the Williams Company headquarters,
the man said politely and respectfully.
I remember you now. I've seen you in the R&D department,
Dalton said as he turned his head to look at Ethan in surprise.
I didn't expect you to have someone on your side who was in such an influential position in the company. You have to have some things up your sleeve at all times. Kevin, that punk, can take the Williams Company away from me, but it doesn't mean he can get rid of all the people I left behind.
Ethan flicked the ashes of his cigar and said proudly. He then took a puff of his cigar, exhaled slowly, and added,
He isn't the only one I have left either. It's just that they can't be in contact with each other without my instructions. Even Andre doesn't know how many other loyal people I have in the Williams Company.
This is really surprising,
Dalton said as he tapped his finger on the table gently. He looked at Andre Hernandez again and said,
Ethan said that he has the ability to take down the entire Williams Company. Now, I will give you 2 minutes to explain. What is your take on the situation?
Andre lightly laughed, and after glancing at Ethan, only then did he say,
"You've been making big waves in Chicago, haven't you? Well, I can tell you that Williams Media has decided to form a new girls supergroup. They're going to bring together 3 of the most popular singers in the world and use their reputation to raise the entire reputation of the media division."
Okay, so what can be done to stop them?
Dalton Steele forcefully interrupted Andre's words with a stern voice. Although Andre was somewhat dissatisfied with Dalton Steele's attitude, after taking a deep breath, he adjusted his emotions and said,
"It's very simple. We just need to create enough trouble on the day the 3 girls appear together and make the Williams Company lose their trust. Then the company's reputation will surely be questioned."
I thought that there was a plan in place with some kind of high level of skill, but I didn't expect that it would be this kind of thing. You're talking about creating drama among some useless singers.
Dalton Steele sniffed and said,
"What you've said is wrong. There has never been a difference between a noble trick and a dirty trick in this business. The best method is the one that defeats your opponent."
Andre could not bear it any longer and retorted. He was a respectable manager in the Williams Company, but Dalton felt that, compared to him, he did not even have the right to sit down at the same table.
"Are you teaching me how to do things?"
Dalton Steele's face suddenly turned cold, and his body emitted a cold aura. The atmosphere in the room instantly became tense and dangerous. The smile on Ethan Williams' face froze, and he cursed Andre Hernandez several times in his heart. He was really acting like an idiot. Who did he think he was?
"Mr. Steele, I think you've misunderstood my intentions,"
Andre explained in a hurry, trying to smooth things over.
"Is that so? What do you mean?"
Dalton Steele's face became darker and darker, and his eyes became colder and colder as he stared at Andre. Looking at Dalton Steele's cold expression, Andre Hernandez could only feel the air around him getting stuffy. Only now did he realize one thing. Dalton Steele was a man who dared to confront Kevin Williams head-on. He was not like the rest of those people that Andre despised who would bow down to him for the sake of a small profit, or just out of respect for his last name. Although he held a high position in the Williams Company, in Dalton Steele's eyes he was no different from an ant. At this moment, Ethan Williams was sitting uncomfortably off to the side, seemingly unable to say anything in his defense. As time passed by slowly, Dalton Steele just stared at Andre Hernandez quietly, but fiercely. Ethan was sure that Dalton's anger meant that this was the perfect time to put his alliance with Dalton, once Kevin's greatest friend and now one of his worst enemies, into motion, and see Kevin's downfall come about almost immediately.